Welcome back for this new session on the booming era of live OTT broadcasting hosted by Limelight Network. So I have the pleasure to welcome Patrick from 11 Sport, Tom from ITV, Tanya from NRK, and the session will be moderated by our host today, Charlie from Limelight Network. So Charlie, the floor is all yours.
Right. Hi. Good day, everybody. So let me first introduce myself. So at Limelight, I've been here 7 years now. It's amazing to me. But I look after all our video solutions, from live to low latency to video on demand, video platforms, all from a product marketing perspective. And I work very closely with the technical team about things. So I'm just going to go around the room and have everybody else talk a little bit about themselves. Why don't you start, Tom?
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here and good to join you all. I'm the technology director for ITV's content supply chain. ITV is, those of you who don't know it, is the UK's largest commercial broadcaster. And so I'm responsible for what we call our content supply chain technology. So that's everything from scheduling and rights management through to the receipt and the processing and the delivery of content, both out to our own platforms and also out to third-party platforms as well. And I also look after the our kind of live streaming back end, the creation of our channels into live streams.
Very good. Patrick?
Hey, I'm Patrick. I'm the tech director for 11sports.com. We're basically a live streaming sports platform, mainly focused around football, but you can find some other sports. My responsibilities are across like the full scope of OTT services, live streaming services of the platform. The group is much larger. We have different territories like Belgium, Portugal, but basically in 2021, 11sports.com live streamed over 20,000 live events so far on a per event basis. So like we're really event based with some linear challenges here and there. So that's me.
Okay. And Tanya?
Hey guys, my name is Tanya and I work for NRK here in Norway. It's the public service broadcaster and basically the BBC of Norway, if you can call it that. And I'm head of product development for our streaming services. So it's for both the linear channel streaming and on demand, live to VOD and everything else. And been working with the streaming industry since 2011. So it's amazing to be here and see how much it's growing each year.
Mm-hmm. Good. So I thought, just like when we write some articles, it's nice to start with challenges that we all face. So as we all look forward to 2022 and what we think is going to happen, just we'll go around again. Tom, what are a couple of top challenges that either you solved or you're worried about that you need to solve, looking at, take it broadly, across the whole spectrum of online video?
Yeah, so I think, that the last couple of years have seen a real shift in people starting to consume content through mobile devices and indeed in the home. Actually, connected TVs, IP connected TVs have really been growing. And we're definitely seeing this, although at the moment our broadcast audience for live events, our biggest audience tends to be on broadcast, there's a definite shift to consuming through our IP platforms as well, both our own and third parties that we deliver into. And so I think, a big challenge for us is the scaling question over the next few years. How do you start to replicate the ability to deliver a really high quality experience to consumers for particularly for live content, where it's much more unpredictable than on-demand content, and deliver that experience to multi-million homes with all the challenges, when that's something which actually we only have part of control of that ecosystem, and we have to work with partners to deliver that experience. And I think that's a really interesting challenge. We're particularly in live sports, but even in some of our other kind of reality, close to live reality programming, which appears like, we deliver it as though it's live. We're seeing north of 1 million heading to north of 2 million concurrent streams and so on. And that's just an interesting challenge to manage that. And I think that growth is only going to continue. So I think how we do that in a sustainable way in all senses, sustainable both kind of from a point of view of actually being able to deliver it and deliver it affordably, but also, of course, increasing these days, delivering it sustainably from a point of view of our impact on power consumption and the environment.
Right, very good. Patrick?
Yeah, maybe to Tom's point, I think scaling is like to the core of our company. We're pretty much a company that both does a lot of like amateur football, which is like in nature, like we don't know when an amateur match is going to be played, is going to be streamed. They might stream, they might not stream, but even if they stream, we like up front, we just don't know that the stream is coming in. So what we solved in the last couple of years, I guess, is like make sure that we have that scalable platform and that those events, because we're an event-based platform and not so much a linear platform, but that we can actually scale to an unpredicted number of events. And that also means that now that we're more and more working together with premium partners, 11 Sports partnered with European leagues, for example, in broadcasting, OTT broadcasting, some of the top European leagues abroad. So like we don't have the actual national rights, but outside of those countries. It means that we also see those leagues being very much used to linear broadcasting. They don't know too much about like event-based broadcasting, and also like that also means that they have always limited capacity to actually deliver those streams. So there's like creativity needed to make sure, and we're trying to like find those creative solutions and products and technologies that make this happen, but to make sure that we can actually scale or help them scale into delivering that content to multiple destinations outside of the linear proposition. So there's definitely, from what I can see, a process ongoing that from traditional broadcasting perspective, it goes into some more like scalable technology, scalable products outside of the enterprise solutions, and it's an interesting development that we see happening in the industry.
Right. Okay. And Tanya.
Yeah, there's of course there's scaling, and as a public service broadcaster with a set budget each year, it's also a matter of the cost you spend on distribution. That's something that we continuously need to look into. And latency, of course. I mean, as a broadcaster, which is also looking into entertainment shows and so on, we of course look into participation. And then when you have a latency for perhaps 50 seconds on some devices, it's not the best audience experience if your vote doesn't get counted because you're just delayed too much.
Yeah, so just as a comment on that, just last week on a different event, somebody posed the question, would it be possible today for some of the major events, like you think of World Cup or the Olympics, or here in the US, our Super Bowl, if everyone wanted to watch a stream, would it be possible? So I did some quick back of the envelope calculations, and no way. I mean, it's not even close. If you think of like last year, of the 100 million people that watched a big sporting event, maybe 5 million were doing it by stream. The rest was traditional broadcast. So it's a long way to go before that can happen. But why don't we go around and talk about what are people doing now? What kind of things are they thinking of to try to ensure themselves? I mean, is it things like multi-CDN, use multiple CDNs to do it? How do you understand your audience? It's always tricky at the end of matches. If scores are tied, when you get to the final minutes, all of a sudden you get this rush of people trying to log on, and that's a whole different problem than just delivering streams. So go around and just what are the couple of things, Tom, that you're looking at trying or hope somebody comes up with?
Well, I think it's interesting what you just mentioned, because what I was going to say is there's no magic bullet to fix this, to be honest. There's no one thing that solves this as a whole things. And actually, very often when we talk about scaling, we focus on the delivery of the video streams themselves. But to your earlier point, actually, sometimes that's not the things that causes us the most problem. Often it's things like people dropping out of a stream and then a large number of people dropping back in again. You know, if we've seen this, things like a soccer match goes to extra time or goes into penalties or something like that, and you can get real spikes in viewers. And often it's things like registration or authentication or other things like this around the platform, which can actually be as much of a challenge to make those scale, particularly when you can be getting really dramatic numbers of people joining in in short periods of time, half-time breaks and things like that. People sometimes they don't stay on the stream, they'll drop out of it and then they'll drop back in at the last minute. Whereas you tend to find at the beginning of the game, that's a little bit less. People tend to drift in more slowly. It's often the breaks in the game itself where that can be more challenging. So I think it's both the video and it's those other elements. And I think it's an interesting question about how you deliver, how you balance up all of the competing things there. Do you do something around latency? Is a kind of a more latency makes it easier to manage that, but as Tanya said, that also delivers a suboptimal experience. So actually clearly where we're trying to get to is deliver those audiences whilst also getting the latency down. Certainly from our perspective, we'd like to try and get a place where you're matching more like broadcast. So people coming at getting a similar, from that perspective, a similar quality of experience regardless of which our platforms they're consuming. So I think we have to look at a number of things. Now, clearly, things like cloud are making it much easier for us to scale some of those services like registration and authentication and other things like that, and the other components of the platform other than the actual video experience itself. On the video side, I think I don't think there's any one thing. I think multi-CDN is part of that story. But I think it's also going to be about how we can work with all the people all the way down the chain, the network providers and everybody else, and even the last mile, because very often the user experience issues can be right in that last mile. It's not enough just to scale the front end or even to scale the middle, but thinking about how we handle that last mile as well is all part of the challenge.
Yep. Okay, Patrick.
Yeah, I think from what we've seen in the past on our platform is that, to Tom's point, half times are always interesting, right? People dropping off, 25% of the people drops off and then comes back. But I think the most challenging moments that we had was not necessarily, like you say, about the video delivery perspective. It's more about registrations, and maybe in our case, it was even more about payment systems. So. I remember one time where we had a very popular match in Brazil, where we had everything ready to be scaled up and hundreds of thousands of customers coming in, and our registration services, we scaled them up, so no issues whatsoever. And suddenly everyone had to buy a pay-per-view pass for the match. And our payment provider under the hood, they at some point just couldn't serve or couldn't process any more payment requests anymore. And then that's when you get to the scenario that Tom just described. It's hey, I can't pay, so I'm going to refresh my page, and I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to refresh, and it's just building up and up and up and up, and suddenly you have a queue of 1 million requests that you can't process anymore. And then having to reach out to your payment provider, hearing that they can process 50 requests a second, while you have millions of them waiting in a queue, is not it's not really the answer that you want to get at that point. But I think that so from a scaling perspective, it's always trying to balance the costs of that scaling versus the experience that you want to deliver to those customers. We could have scaled up everything, including the payment provider services, etc., to the maximum of 1 million users, but it would potentially, or probably most likely, cost us more than actually the revenues that we were getting for it. So it's always that balance of trying to find the right balance between those two. And to Tanya's point, you also don't want to, or rather not have that 50-second latency so that everyone can pay. So it's always going to be a tricky challenge for OTT live delivery.
Yeah. And Tanya?
Well, What can you say? It's for us, we don't have a registration, so you can just start watching the stream. That's a major plus. For example, we had the soccer world championships this summer, but we still do see the major spikes, and we really need to work together with both the CDNs and the origins, and in some cases even talking to the people owning the backbone in the country, because what we're seeing now here in Norway is that the tipping point for actually both using streaming and broadcast is around 45 years of age, and it's moving upwards rather quickly. So from being a service that doesn't need to be too prepared, if you can say that, with a lot of redundancy and robustness, what we have to look into in the next couple of years is how we create the same kind of quality as broadcast has been known for the past decades, and that's a challenge that we can't solve by ourselves, because it's the whole ecology of everyone being involved in Norway and even globally as well in some cases.
Yeah, actually, I mean, that's an interesting point, Tanya. I think you the point you mentioned as well about the kind of resilience piece and how these solutions are kind of architected, that's been an interesting focus area for us as well. You know, as the level of viewing has gone up, it's become much more important now to think about how you can sustain the platform. You know, thinking about disaster recovery, perhaps, you know, wasn't forefront of my mind a few years ago, is much more now. And actually, in an interesting situation, we've had a number of kind of third-party infrastructure events in the UK, which have affected a number of UK broadcasters. And it's really brought home some of this, actually, you know, and for us, it helps us kind of say which of our platforms are really, really geared up for this. And we just have to activate the operational procedure, and which ones actually need some more work. And I think there's two things to that. One is to the point of in an OTT world, actually, so much is about how you work with your partners. And this it's not like broadcast where kind of you transmit it and that's kind of it. You know, there's a partner ecosystem that sits behind this, and having the really good relationships, operational relationships with those partners. And when you have big events, having them lined up and knowing and, you know, and aware is a really big learning. So we've done that. You know, when we have really big events now, we have Slack channels where we have all of our major suppliers and service providers online with us, and actually it just cuts through when there are issues and gets them resolved much faster. But at the same time, we are thinking very seriously about what the end-to-end monitoring looks like. How do we start to build around some of these potential kind of disaster or resilience type scenarios to make sure that, you know, particularly when we get to really, really big events, which for us could be really big from a revenue perspective as well, that we've put enough love and care around them.
Right. You know, what I see just in the industry, because I get to watch all this stuff all the time, is especially with some of the newer things where we've seen some sports events that are only available on streams. No traditional broadcast. There was one last year with Premier League. So it was a multi-CDN, but it's what I call cooperation, because what was happening is in the provider's network operations center, there were video architects from 5 different CDN vendors, all collaborating with each other. And it's interesting to be in the same room with your competition doing that, but it was in everybody's best interest to make sure that it went off perfectly, because viewers, their expectation is just got to be like broadcast. They're not forgiving anymore of rebuffering, because, oh, it's online, rebuffering, it's just part of the happens, but they don't accept that anymore. So it's, you know, it's really all the partners, and then setting up, testing things in advance, redundancy for ingesting. You know, everything has to be redundant. It's engineer's best friend, right? So on the latency thing, let's go around. So one of the technologies that seems to be picking up is chunk transfer encoding, where your chunk sizes become smaller. Sometimes it's associated with CMAF, you know, Common Media Application Format, where you can make micro chunks of just maybe some hundreds of milliseconds, but instead of waiting for a whole segment to be created, as segments are encoded, you play them immediately. And we're finding that I'm hearing people saying you can reliably stream at about 5-second latency pretty much globally. And that's a pretty good match for what broadcast is. Are any of you either looking at that, testing it, or actually using it in production yet to reduce latency?
So maybe in 11 Sports, like we haven't done that in production yet, and obviously looking at it from our angle, like a lot of our content is like maybe less less on top of the football pyramid and more to the amateur long tail part. So like for that, like latency isn't the biggest challenge, but we also have some products that actually need at low latency, for example, AV and data tagging, like tagging important moments in the match so that like we know when they happen and can also act on those moments even before they are delivered to customers. It's definitely one of the use cases for us to be looking at lower latency. So not necessarily to the end customer, but definitely in the process itself, we'd like to be able to make sure that we can like against a lower latency already know what's happening in the stream before it gets delivered to those customers. So for those use cases and definitely in digital processes, it's an extremely useful concept. We're currently trialing like different types, but the advantage of the technology that you just described is that we could potentially also deliver that through CDN resources rather than like a point-to-point what we're doing today. So it's definitely something that we'll be looking at in the near future.
What about telemetry in the wild? A lot of big streaming events sometimes use data from actual players, you know, so you know what's going on right at the user, and aggregating a lot of that, you know, during the event to see what the quality is while the event's going on. Is Tom, are you doing anything like that too?
Yeah, we've been doing that for quite a while in certainly in ITV Hub, which is our kind of main player platform, which kind of owner-operated product, and that's got both VOD and live services in it. For quite a while now, we've been collecting telemetry from that for both the kind of operational reasons that you talk about, and to understand, you know, everything from kind of app startup time through to which networks people are on, and you know, and kind of buffering time and all those kinds of parameters, but also to understand user behavior as well, and that view on what's happening is really vital, actually, you know, to really understand what's happening and to understand when you get issues, are they universal or are they particularly clustered around particular devices or, you know, particular platforms and so on, because and indeed, I mean, in the ideal world, also understanding when they are a problem. You know, the thing that I think is really hard to know is when actually is it a problem in somebody's domestic residence, for example. You know, someone's getting buffering. Well, is it actually their Wi-Fi that's the problem? And sometimes it is, and it's really hard to pull those out from something. You know, in the sense that's an uncontrollable issue, but understanding that from something else is quite hard. You know, but we're looking again at our telemetry because I think, you know, it's a really important area, actually, and you know, and making sure you've got really good telemetry, you know, and I think that there then become interesting questions about how you can use that to play into things like multi-CDN and the degree to which you may or may not want to automate CDN switching and things like that, and to understand quality of experience and use that to drive your ABR ladder. You know, those are all possible topics. You know, so we look at all those. I mean, a bit like we're looking at things like CMAF. We're not implementing it anyway yet, partly I think because there's a question about at what point has it got enough critical mass adoption that you can really affordably roll it out. You know, we haven't talked much about this. So I think one of the challenges is just the proliferation of kind of different ways that we have to deliver to different platforms that creates of itself a scaling challenge. And so it's when you inject something new like that, you've got to make sure it's something you can sustain, I think.
Yeah, it's really almost a chicken or egg when I pay attention to what everybody in the CDN world does. And you know, we sit and look at the like Streaming Video Alliance, and everybody's got the ability. It's on their price sheet, right? But very little traction yet. It's all waiting for somebody else to try it at scale before you do. Yeah.
But I also think it's very complex from when. Well, I have a team of different app developers here in locally, and for them to handle all the different streaming formats and the players and doing it full scale across like 18 different platforms, you really need to be sure that you can bet on the format. So that's why we haven't gone into CMAF yet either, but we're of course very interested in to see how it's going. But I think one of the things that is actually happening across the streaming industry is that I haven't seen as much of a blame game, if you can say that, for the past couple of years. It seems like people are really starting to cooperate across the whole ecology and are really curious about learning how we are to solve this, basically on the mass audience coming to us in a couple of years, hopefully. I've actually seen a lot more of sharing across both different broadcasters, different CNs, etc. Just as you're explaining, Klaus.
Yeah. So specifically around CMAF and chunk transfer encoding, for the low latency, that's big time a major testing issue, because now the encoder, the CDN, and the player all have to be compatible together, and a lot of moving parts. So it gets into these matrix of testing. So with every encoder vendor, which version of their firmware supports it, with which versions of all the different players and so forth. So the matrix it's scary, it's huge. And everybody has to have a testing rig that they can all interoperate on and test everything and make, a compatibility matrix. So it seems to be more of a problem doing this than previous technologies that have come along in terms of trying to make sure, because if any one piece in that chain is incompatible, it breaks.
Yeah.
So that's going to slow things down as we develop that.
There's another angle we haven't talked about yet, and of those of us on the panel, this is maybe kind of most relevant to us at ITV compared to Patrick and Tanya. And that's also in this whole question: how do you deliver advertising at scale, particularly targeted advertising at scale? And that for us is another real issue. For our, we on our kind of initially with our live simulcast streams, where we're basically streaming our live broadcast channels. We started off by just kind of streaming the broadcast ads, but frankly, you can't really monetize that properly in the same way because of the way that they're measured. And we're now heavily moving into targeted linear addressable advertising, and we've been doing it on a number of our channels for a while. But actually scaling that up as well is also quite a challenge. Particularly if you think you've got maybe multiple millions of ad decisions to make in a relatively few seconds. Around, of course, in live, you also the breaks are less predictable as well. It's not, you can't fix the time, so you've got to think about prefetch times and how you can manage that on ad server loads. And so I think equally with the question with CMAF is it's better from some senses, but also it takes away some of your breathing time as well.
Yes.
How you deliver advertising. So I think that's a really, I don't know how we fix that challenge, but I think it is a really interesting one to explore.
Yeah, I mean, what I see going on is people trying to use edge compute to do that. When the typical 30-second latency for HLS and Dash is there, that's a lot more time to make decisions and do server-side ad insertion.
Yeah.
When you get the latency down to 5 seconds, I mean, it's still time, but it's quicker. Yeah. And the infrastructure to be able to handle which ad do you insert into which stream and doing that quickly. We'll talk about security also, but you think about if you want to secure streams with things like watermarking or doing DRM, you've got to fit that into that latency budget as well. So it's challenging. Audience engagement. So the competition environment has changed a lot in the last year in terms of, if in the sports world, it's some of the large social media companies are starting to bid for rights for certain aspects of some major events now that we've seen. And just even away from sports, just normal streaming, we had a lot of the film and television studios that were content to license their content out to people that are, rebroadcasting it or using it as like catch-up TV. And now we're saying, well, gee, we'll start our own OTT service and compete that way. So we've seen it with, some very big players. So what I hear, it all comes down to engagement. If you want to retain the subscribers you have and you want to increase the number of subscribers, it's about trying to differentiate by engagement. So what what are some of the things that you're trying in terms of to make it more engaging, or things you'd like to be able to do, but maybe technologically why you just can't do it yet, and you need something? What are some people dealing with here? Want to maybe start that time?
Yeah. Tanya, sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll go ahead. We've seen a lot of joy in trying to create new moments. For example, in Norway, winter sports is of course huge. So it's about creating new moments, and the sound of winter here in Norway is actually the cowbells are standing on side of the slope, and it's trying to kind of give people additional experiences with them being able to rattle that bell, and it actually shows the engagement on screen as well. So it's that's a fun perspective of doing it, and we're trying to kind of incorporate both claps and everything you can kind of do to participate in different concepts as well. So for example, for the Eurovision Song Contest, which is really huge and has been one of the largest live events, it was possible to just give claps for the different performances. And we had a huge amount of participation that way around, that actually was shown on screen using technology like Unreal and 3D engines as well. So it's I think people are getting really creative at trying to create really good how do you say participation with the digital layer.
Yeah, or the just like being there experience is what I call it. Best. Patrick?
Yeah, maybe like I think we started off in the company as an amateur platform, like a user-generated platform, and basically what we saw was that a lot of the features that were actually out there in like linear, like broadcasting platforms already on premium content was like the highlights, the overlays, like this guy scored a goal, and then like being able to go back and watch that highlight from your favorite player is something that we then replicated onto like that amateur stream, so that to actually create like some kind of a premium experience on top of like just a dad filming his son's football match by a mobile phone, just standing besides the pitch. But I think like since then we also started realizing that engagement is one of the important factors of like getting customers and fans engaged to the content. So things like chat, people like to interact with each other like through any means, right? So like we have some matches and events on the platform that are like the chat is just going, and then it's one team versus another, and it's actually quite nice to see how that evolves throughout the match. Other things that we, for example, are doing in our Portuguese territory is a concept of watch together. So it's basically synchronizing video streams across a group of friends, and they can actually sign in through the experience and basically watch the same moment in the match, like all at the same time together while being connected to each other. So there's so many things that we can do. It's a matter of trying to find the things that stick with our customers, trying to find those elements that gives us the opportunity of engaging with those fans, so that they ultimately enjoy the content. And it starts with the content, right? Like you say, Charlie, earlier, there are some big players in the market, and sometimes it's not about engagement. It's just about like who is able to secure some of the rights that are out there. And so sometimes like or most of the times on premium content, the customer doesn't even have a choice anymore. Like they are like bound to actually enjoy and experience that content through a certain provider. And like so it's balancing between like, hey, like having those features available, but also like making sure that you have the content that you for your fans and customers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Tom.
Yeah, I think Patrick raised a really interesting point there, actually, because I mean, typically for us, I guess it's the same for Tanya, is when we're showing live events, particularly live sports, it's usually uniquely in the UK anyway. It's usually uniquely on our channels and on our platform. Occasionally, we share big events we share with BBC, like the World Cup final or kind of Euros final, but very often it's predominantly on our channel. But we've had to kind of choose carefully which rights we pursue, because it's expensive, because we're ad funded rather than subscription funded. It's a slightly different thing that's driving. It's therefore very much about the revenue drive out of the event itself, rather than kind of sustaining a subscription base. But I think also we're also experimenting at different things around it. For quite a while now we've kind of used things like gaming around the side of particularly rather than individual games, but more around tournaments. Things like the Rugby World Cup and those kind of tournaments. We've done a certain amount of that. Now, the interesting thing about that is also we want to engage with the whole of our audience. So we've not typically put those into our OTT player themselves. Otherwise, you're locking it down to a part of the audience. So they've usually been separate gaming apps or things available through the web or whatever, rather than something built into the OTT proposition itself. But what we have done a few times is again, it's the kind of the highlights thing we've done. We've experimented in the past at doing kind of daily roundups during some of these tournaments, small snippets of highlights, and here's what's coming the next day. And those I think have had some traction and help people to kind of keep engaged in viewing the content through our platform. Certainly gaming on and social media. I mean that helps as well, and we certainly kind of have an active social media presence around those big tournaments. And it's interesting seeing how that works. I think outside sport, in terms of live, a lot of our kind of live entertainment type of shows, the kind of voting shows, X Factor and Britain's Got Talent and The Voice. Again, social media is a really powerful kind of engagement medium there as well. And competitions, that's a really big thing, getting people involved in the voting, involved in all that definitely drives engagement in the programming.
Yeah, I agree. So looking at our time here, I always like to get into predictions. So predictions, part of it is selfish. I'm on the hook to do a couple articles on predictions for 2022, and I have some ideas, but I always like to ask other people what they think. What one or two predictions you think are pretty sure will happen next year? Either innovations.
Good question, Charlie. Give us 10 minutes to think about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. Let me bring us some time. So 4K. I recently got into a debate on a webinar about 4K, and what my offer is yes, 4K content's available. A lot of the reason that people have 4K televisions is because pretty much that's all you can buy. When you go to a big box store, it's all 4K, just because they've made it so cheap to build that, that's what's really on offer. And it was a manufacturer saying, oh, no, that's because there's demand. Said, no, it's because that's all you can buy. It's catching up. And I said, well, but I don't think 4K content is so pervasive. I know some sporting events. So are you doing some 4K broadcasting? Do you charge a premium for it?
Yeah, well, quite interesting. In our end, so at the moment, we're not delivering to consumers any 4K, but we are producing content in 4K. Not so much in live actually, but more in things like drama, where quite a lot of our drama content now is produced in 4K, and increasingly is post-produced in 4K as well. But actually, we're not yet delivering 4K as a consumer experience. Right. I mean, I think 4K on its own isn't enough, to be honest. I think it has to be the full gamut of UHD. I think the wide color, and particularly for sports, actually, I'm not sure that the resolution alone is really what makes the difference. It's the wide color gamut. It's the it's some of those other facets of it which really make the difference, and high dynamic range particularly, I think, actually. Yes. But I think it's an interesting question. I think the jury is still out as to whether or not it's really driving of itself driving subscriptions, or whether it's driving people to viewing on a particular platform versus people really like it when they've got it there. But whether people are coming only because it's there, or leaving only because it's not there, I think the jury's still out on that a little bit. I think it will progress in that direction inevitably, partly because, I mean, to your point, the reality is that 4K TVs are there in order that people can buy 4K TVs, and the devices have come way before the content, and partly because of the cost of production of content. That's one of the reasons it's lagged. But actually, as we all talked about, delivery, all these issues we talk about in delivery, well, we're only compounding the issue by delivering in
yes.
So I think it will come, but I don't think it's as obviously a big change as the move was from SD to HD, and particularly from 4:3 to 16:9, which also coincided with flat panels rather than old TVs, if you like. All of those things came together that really drove HD adoption. I think it'll be a bit more of a slow burn, but I think we will start to see people delivering more and more, particularly, I suspect, sport will be the driver in UHD. And the interesting question will be, will people do that just inherently within their experience, or will they use it as a subscription or revenue driver in itself?
Yeah.
So Tanya, you sort of raised your hand, did you?
Sorry.
Had something, Tanya? I thought you raised.
Well, we were preparing for doing the technical side for the football World Championship this summer, but we chose not to do anything outside of the organization, mainly because it's not only just the signal that you're getting in and rerouting, it's also the studio, it's the graphics, it's everything. And even though it's not it's not the big shift like from SD to HD, but it still kind of smells of it when you go into the live production. I mean, for on-demand content, it's way more, it's much more simple, and it's a different competition with, for example, the global streaming services and how they are using it as a USP. So that will kind of, I think broadcasters will produce more on-demand content for UHD and HDR10 and so forth in the coming years. But I don't think the live is going to be there for 2022. No.
Yeah,
sure.
I got, and I'm sort of laughing at the issue of 8K, and I'd say, well, I'll just close the topic at this. Last year, I saw a demonstration on a giant TV, like an 80-inch TV. It was 8K, and it had high dynamic range capability. And they produced a video that was really to show off what high dynamic range can do. It was stunning, and that had the impression of like going from 1080, or rather from standard definition to high definition was dramatic. Everybody could tell the difference. To 4K, it's pretty difficult, but 8K with high dynamic range, wow. But it's a $30,000 television and no content. That's what it's going to take. That's for the next flip. That's going to be the next thing, but it's got to all be there. So we got like 3 minutes left. So 40 seconds each. Final words before we sign off. What do you want to leave with our audience?
Wow, like I haven't had the pleasure to meet the actual audience. It's hard to do it from
I know.
this perspective.
I miss it. I really miss it.
It's like, I think there's interesting times ahead, right? Like we haven't seen nothing yet. Like what we've been doing so far is just child's play. And if you hear about like Facebook Meta now going for the verses that they want to go to, I think that like there's still like in the next 10 years, like if we look back 10 years from now, then like looking back to this moment, it's really like that. Like our kids would say like, oh dad, like you're an amateur. Like at that point, like if you knew what we know now, then it's incredible like advancements we made in the last 10 years. So
absolutely.
I was going to say something similar. It feels like we've come through childhood and our troubled teenage years, and we're kind of entering the industry is kind of in the adulthood stage now, and it's kind of it's serious business actually, isn't it? It's no longer it's no longer a hobby. You know, this started as a bit of a hobby on the side of a lot of organizations. It's no longer a hobby. This is serious. This is mainstream. And I think that's going to be the big thing, actually. How does this really become, how does it become the thing? You know, in a few years' time, this will be, you know, the way that content's delivered.
Yeah, I agree.
And how is it going to be truly digital? I mean, how is it really going to take into account all the things you can do when it's digital, when you can participate, when you can chat with the people in the studio, when you can kind of do shout outs, when you can really create that fully engaged experience? I mean, we're just tiptoeing into that right now, trying to figure out what's working and what's not working. And we haven't seen anything yet, I think.
Yeah, I can't wait. So I see we're just right at the top of the hour. So thank you very much for agreeing to participate in this and into your busy schedule.
Thank you.
Can again in the future. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, signing off.